as the anniversary that we're celebrating tonight. I think it was working. So back in the days when the internet really wasn't growing very fast, 95 and 97, because it's an amazing thing to see exponential growth for as long as we have. There was a small web design firm in San Francisco. In fact, there were probably quite a few small web design firms in San Francisco in 95, but this particular one was founded by somebody called Paul Murray and Scott Crosby. And they did some design development in 95, 97, and they realized that the more interesting thing that was going on was not so much building the websites, but why is it that people are spending all this money on websites but don't have a clue whether they're getting any payback from them or how they're getting payback from them? And they realized that the more interesting thing to do might be to understand how do we track what's happening on our websites and analyze the returns. And so they, in fact, shifted from being a web design company to being a software company that created a tool that would let them track web traffic and websites. And eventually that company was called Urchin. And the kind of thing they did was, when you look at it, this is my technical slide, I will not go into detail, but basically when you're tracking the web, you can track from the back. So you've got web servers that are dumping huge amounts of data into these log files, or you can track from the front. You've got a little bit of JavaScript. But the key thing is that those two tracking points then get back into a big receptacle of some sort and give people the ability to understand what's going on, where are my customers coming, what are they clicking on, what are they doing when they're at the website. And this was basically, in a nutshell, what Urchin was doing. There were a number of other companies that were doing the same sort of thing. So this is the gang at Urchin. These are four of the founders. In the middle is Paul, the CEO. And 2005, and by 2005 they had quite a bit of success. There were a lot of websites, they were doing a lot of tracking, they had a lot of software. You notice the guys have got a smile on their face. That's called the "we just got bought by Google" smile. Generally is a good thing. So Google did acquire Urchin in 2005. And what was interesting about this acquisition is they bought the company, they bought the software, they brought a lot of the really key players on board, including Paul, and a number of the members of the Google Analytics team came with that original acquisition. And the very first thing they did was, we're going to give it away for free. We're not going to charge it. It's free. And this was interesting. So I did a bit of Googling, of course, and interestingly, I was able to find a forum post. And so Oddsaw, the original poster here, it says, Google is now giving away Urchin. They'll track your stats for free. Who wants to be the first turkey? What's up with this? Why would Google give away something like this for free? People used to pay money for this. What's the story? Well, you think about it. Then as now, what Google sells is advertising online. They sell pay-per-click. Now, what is probably the best reason for me to want to spend more money on pay-per-click? Why would I spend more money advertising online? If it works, right? And how do I know if it works? If I have no analytics, and nobody had any analytics. And Google realized it wasn't about market share, they already owned the market. It was about how big is the market going to be. And if nobody knows whether they're doing well or not, they're not going to spend any more. The market's going to have some size that they're going to be limited to. And so the bottom line is, Google said, right, you analytics guys are charging too much, we're going to buy one of you and give it away for free. Well, how popular was that? It was very popular. Everybody wanted Google Analytics. And you can see some of the marketing. This is a snapshot from the Wayback Machine of the website in 2005. And you can see the angle that they're going at. It's the same ad spend, but you're getting more conversions. If you look in the upper right, it's a little hard to see. There's a link to something called Conversion University. They're still doing that. Training is a key part of what Google does because they want people to understand how it works. So they can be successful so the market gets bigger. Also interesting, in the middle, you can see there's a bunch of apologies about how the system's down, and they can no longer accept any sign-ups because it was vastly popular, and very quickly everybody was using Google Analytics. And so in the beginning, this is 2005, the way it worked was the visitor went to the websites, there were some cookies involved, some cookies involved, the data would go to Google, and you could go to the Google site, and you could look and see your charts, and you can see graphs, and Jim pointed out, you can even see pie charts, you still can, which is not a good idea. There's some interesting work done, and basically, yeah, your brain is particularly designed to not be able to get information from a pie chart. Yet, executives love them, and so you need to put them. Someone in marketing said, there's no way we cannot have a pie chart in our Google Analytics promotion, so there it was. But fundamentally, you had to go to Google's site, use the tool, and look at what Google thought was a good idea for you to look at. And this was their plan, and it worked because they were trying to raise the overall ability of everyone to do analytics. But that was sort of the limit of it. You could do some exporting, you could get data out in some ways, but it was relatively limited. But since we know that data is key, 2009 was a big milestone in the development of the product, and they launched an API for data extraction. And this is particularly fond to my heart because in launching this API, they created a whole ecosystem for third-party vendors to create software that works with Google Analytics. And that, in fact, is what Analytics Canvas is, and a number of other tools that are available. And so the result is you can create now third-party applications that do all sorts of things that Google hasn't thought of or didn't necessarily have the time to do with all that good data that the Google collection system has collected. You can also integrate that data into your existing reporting and analytics systems and do all sorts of interesting things. In our particular case, the kinds of systems that we focus on, and Jim actually touched base, and so we'll do the acronym test to see if you remember. Our tool is in effect an ETL tool. It does the extract, transform, and load. And so we're basically able to pull data from lots of different Google accounts through the Google APIs, and in fact now they have multiple APIs, as well as pulling data out of systems within the enterprise. So for example, your customer relationship management system, your product management system, your ERP, any other data that you have. We've got a client and their website is a television station, and they use Nielsen ratings. So they get in a file and they suck it up and they get it in there, so now they can mess with that data. And so really it's the idea of making, in this case I've called it a data warehouse, but it's making another place where you can get all the data together and do things with it. So if we keep going towards the future, 2011 they also put a whole bunch of new engineers onto the Google Analytics product. There was a real ramp up in how many people were doing development. And in 2011 they announced all sorts of new features which are very interesting. I won't go into them in detail, but fundamentally they gave all sorts of new ways to connect and to understand what was going on within that web traffic and what was happening with visitors on your site. And they also made another announcement. It turns out, and it's interesting, because 2011, which is 2005, when they decided to give it away for free, 2011 they thought, well, yeah, we could have a version that we charge you something. We could do that. And by that time, the market had become much more mature. Just the general amount of e-commerce going on in the world is much bigger. And hold on to your hats, because it's going to get even bigger still. And so they went in, and you can see I've got my same Mac problem font. They went and decided, okay, we'll introduce a premium version. For some companies, it was the thing of, well, we can't use something for free. We need to have an SLA, we need to have a contract, we need all these things. But in the end, when you look at it, premium is premium because it's got more data. And it makes sense. The people that really need to use those massive Google data centers that Jim showed us a photo of want to use more data, and that's where Google is charging a premium. A little bit after that announcement, this was in the spring, and these numbers weren't really touched by the premium announcement, it was too new, but it just gives you a sense of how broadly it's used. 80%, more than 80% of the websites that do some form of tracking track with Google Analytics. Now, half of them exclusively use Google Analytics. The other half, it's your second tool. You're using something else, and you're using Google Analytics. And 55% of the top 10,000 websites. So Google is a very, very broadly used tool, and they've proven themselves in terms of the infrastructure, what they can do. What was also very interesting, and this is a shot from the Google Analytics Summit last October. And if you recognize the fellow, it's the same fellow from the middle of the photo of Urchin. This is Paul Murray, who is now Director of Engineering at Google for the same, for Google Analytics for the product. announced something called universal analytics. And this is what I'm going to touch on a few points about